Friday night, which means it's time for another episode of Fear. The Echoes of Fear, that is. I am your co-host, Jason Hewlett.
And I'm Kenton J. Moore.
And we're talking fear of the oceans, water, depth, all this stuff. What is it, the official name for that there, Kenton?
So we're talking about today, Thalassophobia, which is the fear of the oceans and large, deep bodies of water. It comes from the Greek word thalassa, meaning sea. But what's fascinating about it, Jason, is this one actually encompasses a whole bunch of subsets of different phobias, believe it or not.
Well, actually, you know what? And I can, because there's so many different components to large bodies of water. There's like the fact that there's this large body of water. And then it's like, what's in the large body of water? And what can happen to you if you fall into this large body of water?
Yeah, exactly. You know, and it's, when you really look at it, so thalassophobia is considered a primal fear. So it's just like when we talked about our fear of the dark in our first episodes in nyctophobia. And we talked about how the phobia comes from not necessarily the darkness itself, but what's in the darkness, what our imagination fills in the gaps. Well, thalassophobia is very much the same. It's very similar in the sense that you're not afraid of the water itself. If you are afraid of water, which is actually another type of phobia, fear of water itself is aquaphobia. But thalassophobia, being the fear of the oceans and large bodies of water, is just a general persistent phobia, fear of the entire thing, like the grandeur, the abyssal depths, you know. And there's all these subset phobias that are very interesting that cause an overall sense of thalassophobia.
So what are those? Because I see you have your like pages and pages of notes there. So what are those other various phobias within this phobia?
All right. Well, so we'll start with bathophobia, which is actually one that I myself have. So bathophobia is the fear of depth. It's a fear of an unfathomable depth. So a distance that you can't quantify. So people who suffer it, like myself, we have a very difficult time swimming in water where we can't see the bottom, right? I also, in my bathophobia, it goes a little bit further, where if I lay in a field looking up at the sky without clouds, I have this terrifying feeling that I'm going to fall and never stop. I can't look down wells or deep caves where I can't see the bottom, you know, stuff like that. But going on underneath the other ones, there's cymophobia, which is a fear of waves, or that undulating motion that leads to seasickness and things like that. One of my personal favorites, and you might like this one, submechanophobia.
Fear of submarines?
Close. Submechanophobia is the fear of underwater structures that don't belong, like shipwrecks or plane crashes or ruins underwater. Atlantis.
I was just going to say Atlantis.
So then also moving on, you've got ichthyophobia, which is the fear of fish. Fun fact, the author H.P. Lovecraft, who was responsible for the Cthulhu mythos, was a known ichthyophobe, was afraid of fish. So that's kind of, you know, fits, right? And then you've got, and this is a fun one to try to pronounce, megalohydrothalassophobia, the fear of huge objects or creatures underwater.
Like Cthulhu and Jaws and the Megalodon and all the other things that make up the horror movies we'll talk about in the second half of this episode. That's fascinating. Like that one thing can have so many. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know, when you think about it and you break it down into personal experiences and stuff, you know, like submechanophobia, one of the examples I found when I was researching was if you swim underneath a dock and you see that, you know, rusty chain with all the stuff stuck to it disappearing off into the darkness and you get that pervasive sense of fear, that could be submechanophobia. The famous images of the Titanic, where you could only see the bow of the ship sticking out of the abyssal darkness, submechanophobia, right?
Yeah, that's wild. And I mean, that kind of stuff doesn't frighten me, but I understand why people are frightened of it. In Lake Okanagan, at one of the ends, some asshole made a statue of the Ogopogo and put it on the bottom of the lake. And there, I've seen footage of where people come across it, and it just suddenly, like, you're swimming, and then slowly it looms out of the darkness, this giant monster.
Yeah, that's a thing, right? Like, it's become a thing where people have put, obscure statues underwater. I think there's a few examples online that you can find of, there's a Jason Voorhees statue submerged underwater somewhere. Can't remember the exact location, but
that's pretty cool. So you had quite a long career in the Navy, and we've teased this before, but you have bathophobia. How did that work for you, being on a vessel, having to do this job, usually surrounded by water?
You didn't give it much thought, to be honest with you. You did your job, and I'm okay as long as I'm above the surface. It's when I'm submerged, when I'm floating in it. And it's funny you asked that question, because I gave this so much thought over the last couple of days. Like, what was my triggering event? Did I have a triggering event? What is my actual fear of these depths, right? And, I don't fear drowning, ironically enough. And I don't fear the water. I fear being lost in an abyss. I fear being forgotten. I fear sinking and never stopping. You know what I mean? And as a triggering event, I remember specifically a time when I was a kid. Some friends of mine and I went swimming at Dunn Lake, just a little ways north of us here. And Dunn Lake has a fisheries barge just off of a beach, right? And my friends were out on the fisheries barge, and I was trying to swim out to them. And I think I was maybe 12, maybe 13, pretty young. And I'm swimming along, and I'm looking down below me, and it's maybe 20, 30 feet deep. And I can see the silt. I can see, the trees sticking out of the silt. Everything's got this gray, lunar appearance kind of below me. And I'm swimming along closer and closer and closer to this drop off into this abyssal blackness. And all of a sudden, there's an explosion of movement below me. And this just gray fog rises up from the depths. And out of this fog comes a sturgeon, right? Which, if you've never seen a picture of a sturgeon, Google them online. They're like freaking dragonfish. They're horrible, ugly, demonic looking things. And this thing comes out of this fog of gray, disappears over the drop off into the blackness, just vanishes, And I remember panicking, and I remember my friends having to come and get me and bring me out to the barge. And when I was on the barge, I was looking down at the water and watching the nets disappear into the darkness and stuff. And I remember thinking, like, I don't want to get back in the freaking water, man. They had to come out with a boat and bring me back in a rubber dinghy. But then, fast forward to the Navy, like you'd think, well, why would a person like that join the Navy? But that's a fun story too, because when I got to boot camp, I'd filled all my paperwork out for Air Force. I'd asked for Air Force careers and all this stuff, and nobody ever told me that I wasn't going to be one. And they brought me in as a supply technician, which is like a logistician. And I remember standing in line at boot camp outside the bus the first day, still in my civvies, duffel bag beside me. And they're reading roll call, and they say, "Ordinary Seaman Moore." And I didn't answer, because I was expecting private, right? So I thought, oh, that's crazy. There's someone else here with the last name Moore, right? So I didn't say a word. I stood there, and the guy says, "Ordinary Seaman Moore." And I didn't answer. And then he drops his paper, and he goes, "Which one of you idiots' last name is Moore?" And I waited. Nobody else put their hand up. So I'm like, uh-oh. So I put my hand up, and he's like, "You don't know your own name?" And I was like, I thought I was Air Force. I was expecting to hear private. And he's like, "Well, it says here you're Navy." And I was like, well, shit.
I guess you're going to have a career working on boats. That's awesome. It's funny. I don't particularly have a phobia about water. I guess mine would be the last one, the one about that we can't pronounce, the Thalassophobia, about the objects of creatures in the water, because I can swim. I've scuba dived. I've been to the max depth a sport diver can go, which is awesome. And I remember just floating there, looking down into nothing, looking up 100+ feet to just faintly seeing the sky through the water and being completely confident. But put me in a swimming pool at night and I allow my brain to go to like Jaws or some other horror movie, even that really lame one that just came out, Night Swim or something like that, the thought of some creature, that will fuck me completely. We'd play a game growing up as kids where we'd swim out to our floating dock on Lake Shuswap. My buddies and I would be hanging out on the floating dock and we wait for the sun to set. And then we'd tell scary stories and all this, and then we'd dare each other to swim to shore. And it was this cruel game. And of course, some asshole would always like get under the water, swim and grab someone's leg and just perpetuate it. So that'd be my bit. I can handle everything but the thought of what is in that water.
Yeah. You know, and it's funny because, like you say, I'm also a water rat too. Despite the fact that I can't swim if I can't see the bottom, you can't keep me out of water if I'm near it. You know, my uncle had a swimming pool in his backyard when I was a kid, and I used to swim and I'd dive and I'd lay down on the bottom with a brick on my chest until my ears would bleed and it would drive my mom nuts. You know, and she'd be like, the water is bleeding from my ears, but I didn't care. I loved it, right? And there was a time, a part of me in the Navy that was like, maybe I should face this because, you know, you could become a ship's diver. It was one of your secondary activities you were allowed to do. And I thought, you know, if I could face my bathophobia, that'd be amazing, man. Like these guys, they dive to the bottom of the ship, they clean the hull, they take things off the propeller.
Man. That'd be epic,
right?
What a cool job.
Yeah, or like they do like mine clearing and all sorts of stuff. And I thought, yeah, if I could face this, that would be so awesome.
Did you?
Well, so the closest I ever got, and, you know, like I apologize for all this, the Kenton J. Moore story time that you guys are suffering in this episode, but I was posted to Her Majesty's Canadian ship Ottawa as a patrol frigate, you know, and we were doing it's called a rim pack. No, it wasn't rim pack. It was a Westploy. It was a Westploy deployment. So you go to all these countries around the Pacific Rim. It's all political, port to port to port, right? It's peacetime type activity. And we had this really great commanding officer, and he gets on the broadcast one morning there, and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have just spoken to my charting officer, and he's informed us that at 1 p.m. this afternoon we will be crossing the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest part in the Pacific Ocean. Some consider the deepest part on Earth, right? So he says, I am going to authorize a Swimex."
What's that?
So a Swimex is when the ship comes down to just barely moving in the ocean, and we're allowed to jump off. And we're allowed to jump off, and we're allowed to swim, and they have a jumping ladder. They've got the ship divers out there in case something happens. They've got the rescue boats out there. They've got a guy up on the bridge wing that's called a shark watch, which actually was my job for the longest time. They take the guy with the best shot, like best accuracy on the ship, and they put him on the bridge wing to look for sharks. And I was like, you know what? Bathophobia or not, if I don't do this, I will never forgive myself, right? If I don't have the opportunity to say I did this, I'll never forgive myself. So I did. And it was a 34-foot drop from the deck to the water. And I jumped off, and I was just like, I hit the water, and it was so easy to float. You know, there was no waves. Everything was just the most prime, pristine conditions you can imagine. Beautiful sun, no clouds. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, this isn't bad. And I'm looking out to like an empty horizon, and guys are laughing and they're splashing each other, and they're, you know, wrestling in the water, like you mentioned, grabbing each other, trying to scare each other. And I'm sitting there like, this isn't that bad. And then I look down, right? And I look down and I saw my feet, and then I just saw blue, and I saw light beams that just end. I saw the entire bottom of the hull of the ship in crystal clarity, and I realized that I was like, there is miles. There is literal miles of nothing below me. And my best friend, who was up on the deck watching all this at this time, he said I climbed the jumping ladder like Spider-Man. He was like, I've never seen anyone move so fast.
That's wild. I mean, but good for you for at least doing it. For however long you lasted, that's an achievement. How many people can say they swam above the Marianas Trench?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the sole reason, Jason, the sole reason I faced it. is so that I could sit here with hand over heart for the rest of my life and say I've swam in the deepest part of the ocean, right?
So what, in your research, what are these reasons for people to have this thalassophobia? You know what I mean? Like these different phobias. What is like the general, what have people said is the reason that they get scared of these things? What are the causes?
Well, it's again going back to it's a primal fear, right? I mean, if you think of environments for humans in terms of what we can live in, right? What's amenable to human life and success, the ocean and large bodies of water is not one of them. I mean, living on the edges of such things, sure, yeah, you know, all human cities are built close to water. But the two most hostile environments to human life are below the oceans and space, right? So, you know, it's this idea of a never-ending, you know, abyss, like that there's nothing there. This desert of underwater, where you just can't know. And, you know, scary thought here, ladies and gentlemen, like really try to wrap your brain around this. We have only, to this day, explored 6% of the bottoms of the oceans. 6%. We know more about the 9 planets in our solar system than we know about what's at the bottom of the ocean. And like when you talk about the megalothyroid, the blah, 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 giant monsters under the ocean thing, I'm not even going to try that anymore. When you talk about that, abyssal gigantism is a proven scientific fact. I mean, look at colossal squid. There's a ton of these monsters down there, right? Like, it's this tendency for deep sea dwelling animals to be larger than their shallow water relatives, right? You know, at things like there's jellyfish, giant octopi, right? Isopods, like huge underwater spiders that just roll around in the dark down there. It's a creepy, foreboding, alien environment that we just cannot understand. So when, you know, people who fear the sea, they fear, you know, being lost, being a part of that alien environment where they have literally no chance.
Yeah, I mean, like, because the footage that's come back of the Marianas Trench and the creatures in it, those are horrifying beasts of nightmares. Like, you know, people like H.P. Lovecraft, they're not stretching to say that terrifying things could potentially exist down there. And because we have only explored 6%, I didn't know it was that little. I thought it was like more like 20. No. So it shows my ignorance on the subject matter. Like 6% is nothing. And for some reason, I don't understand why we aren't more fascinated by the water. We keep looking up to space, but we don't actually look to the oceans.
Yeah. You know, and interestingly enough, actually, China has just started working on a huge subsurface city in the South China Sea. And they're like a research station, basically an underwater version of the ISS. You know, and we'll get into that in the pop culture episode, but there's some, you know, cool TV shows and everything that I really like from back in those days. But yeah, like, you know, the prevalence of the phobia, some experts believe is 9%, but the problem with it being a primal fear is it's in constant evolution. You know what I mean? Like people who experience a hurricane, like New Orleans when it flooded back in the early 2000s, you know, people who experience flooding events might suddenly develop the phobia. You know, so anybody who survives an encounter with a shark or, you know, a capsized boat, you know, and, you know, there is a fascination with the sea. Like myself, I might be afraid of the depths and I might have bathophobia and I might have all these issues and I might have panic attacks if I'm lost in the ocean and can't get up. But I still love it. I'm in love with the ocean. I watch nothing but ocean documentaries, you know, and I love being on the ocean. I love cruising. I miss the Navy a lot of days, you know, the adventure of it. I love the storms at sea. I love the smell. I like, you know, the animals you would see. But yeah, it's still a terrifying thing to think of that you know, at any moment this unforgiving mistress is just going to swallow you up and you'll be forgotten forever.
No, I agree. Like I grew up, you know, most of my youth was spent at a cabin on a lake kind of thing. And I love being on the water, like literally on the water, in the water. I love swimming, scuba. But you're right. Like I remember, and actually I'll never forget it. There's one summer day where we were at the Shuswap And, we're hanging out. We did all the stuff on the lake, and then it starts getting cooler, and the wind picks up. So you leave the water, and you kind of go up the cabin. And then I can remember this storm coming from the west up the valley, and it's this wall of white moving across it. And there's this guy on this boat trying to get back. And that wall of white hits him, and the whole boat capsizes, and people have to go out and rescue the person. And it's like, and then the storm passes, the rain goes away, and it's completely calm again, like nothing happened. Like it is... And that's like inland on a lake. Like I could not imagine the ocean where there's nothing to stop this storm. So yeah, it is. I think you're right. It's the unpredictability of the environment itself.
Yeah. And, like, let's be honest, you can go to places on the ocean that are absolutely tranquil and beautiful and, for lack of a better word, perfect. And you can go to places that are just 2 steps from hell. Like one of the sails we did, we went up to Dutch Harbor, Alaska, which, if you don't know that name, the Discovery Channel show Deadliest Catch about the crab fishing industry, that it's centered around Dutch Harbor, Alaska, right? So the Aleutian Mountain Range, which comes off the coast of Alaska and points toward Japan, is known for some of the most treacherous waters outside of the Atlantic Ocean, right? And we sailed through there with like 30-meter waves. Like, for 3 days, we were being buffeted by this. And in an early episode, I mentioned that we had seatbelts in our beds on the ship. That was the one time in my 9 years I spent on board Canadian ships that I actually used that seatbelt. And I buckled my ass in because, like, guys were getting thrown out of their racks and they're landing in racks with other guys. It was just chaos. They brought the ship down to an absolute skeleton crew for 3 days. Now, fortunately, I was one of those people where I have this really weird thing where you could physically do anything with my body and I don't get sick. Like, I don't get seasick, I don't get car sick, I don't get air sick. Put me in VR and I'm sick instantly. Simulate it, I'm sick instantly. But so we were out there at sea, and my best friend and I, who has the same thing, we loved it because we were getting seconds in the meal line. Like, there's nobody there. We're like, woohoo, and we figured out that if you time it right, when the ship goes up a crest, you wait at the bottom of a ladder, and when it starts going down the other side, you can jump an entire deck without touching a rung on the ladder. It's like you feel like Mario, but then you hit the next deck and the ship comes up the next crest. And your weight triples. Like, it was just insane.
I could not imagine. That would be just entirely, yeah. Closest I ever came would be to crossing from England to Ireland, the ferry crossing. It was only like 2 hours, but it was like the worst weather I've ever experienced. And I just spent the whole thing sitting in a chair looking at a white wall, because I do get motion sick. But a buddy of mine on that tour, Mark, he had been in the Navy, and he's like dancing across the deck and jumping up and down, and he was having a great time on this water. So what should we leave listeners with? I mean, I like the fact that we could use so many of your stories, because that brings it to life. Whereas a lot of these we haven't been able to, in many degrees. So what would be a good thing to leave people with, Kenton, when it comes to this phobia?
I would say just. It's one of those things where, if you get terrified sitting in your apartment, just thinking about the idea of the ocean, I wouldn't recommend going swimming in it. You know what I mean? But like all phobias, exposure therapy is key, and even for me, myself, with my known bathophobia, I've been struggling with it, suffering with it all my life. I'm still able to do these things. Just take it a little bit at a time, like Jason said earlier. The ocean is an absolutely stunning place. It's a beautiful place to experience. And if you can't do it in real life, there are so many documentaries, learn, ask questions. Like if you're fascinated by it, talk to somebody like me who's just in love with it. I often reference a line from Popeye a long time ago that, Nobody chooses the sea, but everyone who meets her falls in love. Right? Yeah. So just learn,
That's awesome. And of course, next episode has been our tradition through this first season. We're going to talk about the popular culture that has played upon all these wonderful fears. And there's a lot of it out there. So until next Friday, I'm Jason.
And I'm Kenton.
Go for a swim, y'all.